If you've worked in this industry, even for a year or two, you've probably heard it 1,001 times. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. And in this episode, I want to break down what documented actually means, where the definitions come from, and talk about some things like ALCOA Plus and the importance of it. The longer that you work in the space, the more you realize that the importance of documentation isn't a cliche. It's really the foundation. It's really everything behind compliance. If you look at ISO 13485, a lot of the trainers emphasize that it's written in a way that you can follow it in terms of implementation. If you start in the beginning and you follow it down the line, you can see that, oh, I need a document management system before I get into management responsibility, before I get into resources, before I so on and so forth, before I get into product realization and the measurement analysis. It's written in a way that flows by the way that you would actually use it if you were in a greenfield site. And all to say that documentation comes before anything else because it's really the foundation. You need to have a doc management system. You need to have doc management principles to be able to manage regulated products like pharmaceuticals and medical devices. So today we're going to define what documented actually means and break down data integrity. Data integrity is that your data is complete, consistent, and trustworthy enough to make a decision. That's what ALCOA is all about. I've had on the show Catherine Eban, who is a New York Times bestselling author of the book Bottle of Lies. A few years before she wrote the book, Catherine toured a pharmaceutical facility, and somebody casually told her, we're not allowed to use Whiteout. And she mentioned that when I interviewed her.
And I will say that before I started reporting this, I knew exactly zero about how to make a generic drug. I called up this laboratory in New Jersey, which was one of these high quality labs, and I asked for a tour, and they said yes. And I went out there and I was following around the woman who was the quality director. And then she had said to me, oh, and by the way, we ban whiteout in the facility. And I was thinking to myself, what the hell does whiteout have to do with generic drug manufacturing? And of course, I found out that they ban whiteout to remove the temptation to alter data. And that is when I began to understand how central data is to quality. And it was really, I sort of mark the beginning of my education there.
The reason that you can't use whiteout in our industry is based on ALCOA Plus. You can't erase accountability, and that's where we begin. ALCOA started in the 1990s when FDA started to develop a framework for ensuring that data integrity in GMP environments were instilled. Over time, it's really expanded, and today it appears very explicitly and where it appears implicitly. You have times where elements of ALCOA are mentioned in certain sections, and in others you have ALCOA and ALCOA Plus spoken to explicitly. Some of the documents that are probably best to read around this are the guidance documents. So there's two that you can see on the list. One is the MHRA GXP Data Integrity Guidance. This is widely cited as the most cited reference to ALCOA Plus. And then there's also the FDA Guidance for Industry Data Integrity and Compliance with CGMP. And this reinforces some elements of ALCOA where it emphasizes like attributability and things being contemporaneous, things being original and accurate, and in particular speaks to the issues like data manipulation and backdating. So there's a lot of bad that can happen when data integrity principles and ALCOA Plus are not followed. Catherine Eban actually wrote a whole book about it, and one of them is Ranbaxy, where they had to have a $500 million DOJ settlement because they falsified lab results. There was missing data in submissions. Other companies have gone through import alert. Other companies have had to do global recalls. And data integrity is one of those things where it can be a horrible systemic failure if the proper forethought is not in place. So having said all that, let's go into what ALCOA and ALCOA Plus are. So What makes up the original ALCOA is 5: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. Attributable means you need to know who did what and when they did it. You can attribute that activity to a certain person. That means things like signatures and login IDs, audit trails, not allowing access to people who shouldn't have access. If it's not attributable, it's basically anonymous. And that really doesn't fly in pharma or medical devices. Legible is if no one can read it, then it doesn't count. So things like chicken scratch, like poor handwriting, faded ink, or corrupted files, things like that means you can't actually access or read the information that was recorded. Contemporaneous means that records must be made at the time that the work actually happens, not later. This is something that lab technicians are often taught to really make sure that they're doing, is to record their information quickly and immediately. You want to make sure that the first recorded version happens immediately. If it's not contemporaneous, how can anyone trust that you know what you did? It's if I ask my daughter what she had for dinner as she's eating dinner, she'll know what to say. But if I ask her the day after or 2 days later, she'll have to think about it. If I ask her, was the steak seared, or was it medium well, or was it medium rare? So things like that are really important to do immediately. O is original. You need to keep the first recorded version, whether it's physical or electronic. Copies are just a reflection of what you did, not the actual original of what you did. The last one is accurate. So the data has to reflect reality. It has to be correct, not what you hoped would happen. Errors need to be corrected immediately. They can't be hidden. These 5, ALCOA, form the backbone of data integrity, but even these aren't enough in the current state of affairs. So as time progressed, the plus was added in as additional icing on the cake to deal with elements that apply to today's electronic system. So there's 4 more elements added to ALCOA Plus: complete, consistent, enduring, and available. Complete means that nothing is missing, that raw data, failed tests, operator notes, it's all there. Consistent means that entries follow a logical, traceable order where timestamps can't be out of sequence. If, for example, I have a kappa record, to use the drug terminology, if I have the kappa record that is an output of a deviation, I can't have a kappa record that's approved before my investigation is complete. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Timestamps can't be out of sequence. If step 3 happens before step 2, that's where you have a data integrity problem. Enduring means that the data must have the ability to really survive. So if it's stored on a note or a temporary drive or on somebody's computer, it's not enduring. When you think enduring, think validated storage and long-term access, like I can find it whenever. And available. When you need the data for an audit, inspection, or internal decision, it can't be something that you struggle to find. It might as well not exist. The available actually brings me to a situation that I ran into a number of years ago when I was in an FDA inspection, and I was tasked with an audit request where the inspector wanted to understand how a product was developed. They were reviewing design input requirements, and they were like, can I see the SOP for design controls, and particularly design inputs? We were looking at the SOP references and couldn't find them. We found out that because this was such a legacy product and because there hadn't been any changes made to it, it was using SOPs that were 3-4 orders of magnitude behind what any of us were trained to. There wasn't anybody around anymore that had access to this SOP. So I had to run down to doc control and find a person who used to work at the manufacturing site that was being inspected and ask them to help me find the SOPs that were used. Because there were different naming conventions used historically, it ended up being like, oh, we migrated from this system to this other system, and all these documents were given a new ID. And that wasn't reflected in the design input requirements document that referenced the documents in the old system. So the long and short of it is we were able to find them. But the only reason we were able to find them is because there was somebody who had all that tribal knowledge that was able to help us. And out of 20, 30 people who were involved in an inspection, none of us had a clue where to find this SOP. And so it being available and ready, I think, is really critical. And I know that there's a lot of companies who are working with AI to make things easily findable. And they talk about, know if you've worked in our industry where you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, it can be really time consuming. Yeah, I think the next frontier as far as this particular area goes is taking historical documentation and making it easy to find. The plus principles are really what makes sure that your data stands up under scrutiny after years to come across multiple systems and through different situations like inspections, audits, or people trying to access historical information. In the age of using sophisticated document management systems, it's tempting to think we've outgrown the problems that come with paper records, that things like LIMS and cloud systems, electronic batch records, electronic DHR records, electronic submissions solve everything, but data integrity risks have definitely not gone away. They've evolved. Today's warning letters, while they're a little bit different in terms of what they find as far as specifics around data integrity, they still come up with the same things a lot of the times. Backdated entries, lost raw data, unexplained gaps in timestamps, inaccessible records during inspection. These issues are not caused by paper or outdated tech. They're caused by not having the principles of data integrity in place. And it's an area where there isn't really a whole lot of flexibility or understanding when it comes to regulators, because like I said, it's the bedrock of everything. If you have poor data, you have no ability to communicate that you are producing things to quality, whether it's work product or product. Documentation isn't just about checking boxes or following SOPs. It's about making sure that what you're doing day to day is creating a record that's real. It's showing your work. It's making sure that things are traceable, that they're reviewable, that when you need to, they are reproducible, and that ultimately it all comes down to trust. One of my favorite quotes is that trust is gathered in drops but lost in buckets. So the next time you hear somebody say, if it's not documented, it didn't happen, hug them, thank them, and remind them that if it's not to ALCOA and ALCOA Plus, it's not documented and it didn't happen.